We're with CAL FIRE Battalion Chief Mike Moeller, who works out of the southern region of California, a lot of Riverside and San Diego County, but you spend some time at all ends of the state. Chief, I understand we are doing a lot of fighting of these fires with aircraft. What about the conditions in these fires makes it ripe for using these different aircraft?
Well, as we're seeing, unfortunately, we're in a siege in Northern California, and then we're seeing those weather conditions also in Southern California. But again, aircraft play a major part in the firefighting role. It's a paramilitary operation. We also need those boots on the ground to support the aircraft. But again, vital role. But with some of the winds and the smoke that we're seeing, there's different areas where we're able to use them, and sometimes we have to set them down, but it plays a major role in stopping these fires.
Now let's talk a little bit about that role, because you talked about boots on the ground, which we all expect when we have a fire of any type. But talk about how if using the aircraft then helps what they're doing.
Well, what we use is not only our helicopters, but also the fixed wing. And what your listeners need to understand is when we come in and we drop water right on the fire. That is a direct firefighting tool to support those ground troops. When we drop fire retardant, or your listeners see the pink stuff, the FOS check, we drop that in front of the fire. And what that does is the fire burns up to it, and not only can it slow it, in a lot of cases will stop it. So we actually build a box with retardant. So with that two-pronged attack with our helicopters and our fixed-wing aircraft to support those ground troops, it helps us build those, one, direct firefighting, but again, those containment lines.
And now you just started to answer the next question I was going to ask you, because I often think myself of containment lines as the guys out there with the bulldozers or the hand crews with a pickaxe, cutting a line. That retardant line counts as part of the containment, yeah?
Well, it does, but that when we're talking again, that retardant comes down, we consider that a line to stop that fire, at least slow it. But containment really is when those ground troops get in there and support that retardant line. So it still is boots on the ground, hand tools, cutting, that hard, arduous work to support that retardant line. So when we do cut, that's the containment line supported by the retardant from the aircraft.
Now, is it always helicopters dropping water and fixed wing dropping retardant, or is that mixed a little bit?
No, it's mixed. It's mixed, but the majority of the time it is. Our helicopters are dropping water, and our fixed wing are dropping retardant. Now, we have some aircraft that are fixed wing that will drop water, but 99% of the time, when your listeners see a helicopter, it's usually going to be dropping water. Now, again, a helicopter can switch to retardant also depending on the airframe.
Okay, so the other thing I want to do is go through some of the aircraft that are being used and why they perform differently in different areas and different terrain. And let's start with those helicopters. What's the benefit of making use of those for those water drops?
Well, the helicopters, and again, different sizes all the way up to when we see the sky cranes dropping thousands of gallons of water. Those are a very strategic, immediate hit on a active part of the fire line that is called in by the ground crews, the operation crews, along with the fixed wing. So I would say for your listeners, the helicopter are quick, boom, let's hit hot spots, let's hit the fire line that's active, physically drop water on it. The retardant, our fixed wing aircraft, starting with CAL FIRE's air fleet, which again is one of the largest in the world of wildland firefighting aircraft, supported by what we call when needed aircraft, our federal partners, local partners, but when we call in a fixed wing aircraft, that is more of a strategic drop. Our air attack platform, pretty much the air traffic controller in the sky, is identifying target areas and relaying that between the operations on the ground and the aircraft that are flying. So yeah, so your listeners, the helicopter, boom, let's hit hot spots, direct firefighting. The fixed wing are in front of that fire building that box of retardant.
And, having watched some of those helicopters up close, as I understand it, well, part of the benefit there, you talk about the quickness, is they can go to a pond or a swimming pool or something and fill their bags or their tanks or whatever very quickly and keep hitting these things, within just a few minutes of each other, where the fixed wing, they have to go back and land and refill retardant tanks and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit longer turnaround, isn't it?
That's great. And that's a great point. Turnaround time is major difference, especially for our boots on the ground operations. Is that quick turnaround time. So yes, let's talk about our helicopters. They will find a pond water source, but we also set up mobile dipping tanks closer to the fire to close that gap or that window of turnaround time. And then we're very fortunate throughout the state of California, the way that CAL FIRE's air attack bases are spaced out, including McClellan here locally, is that our aircraft are within 20 minutes at the most for response and can go to other bases to refill. But once we load up on those fixed wing, we have a continuous fight with those fixed wing aircraft.
Okay, now let's talk about those fixed wings just a little bit. We'll start with the smaller ones. Those, I don't want to call them more utilitarian, but there's a little more flexibility with where they can go, isn't there?
There is. When you're looking at a smaller fixed-wing aircraft, a very, I would say, agile would be the best case, or where we would use that in deeper canyons, that they can get lower off the deck, so to speak, or from the ground. Those are more of an agile aircraft. And then when we move up into what we call our VLATs, or very large air tankers, those are less agile, but a very important tool in the toolbox. And that's the way we look at our fixed wing, from our smaller all the way up to our VLATs. Is they're a very specific tool, and the air traffic controller, or what we call our tactical air officer, is going to make that decision along with operations on where to use those aircraft.
Now, you mentioned the bigger ones that are designated as VLATs. The one we think of is the DC-10 that we're seeing, but now we're seeing a newer one, and visually they put on one heck of a show, which is why a lot of people tend to hone in on watching them and being interested in learning about them. This new one is based on a 747. What can you tell me about this?
It is. It's a global supertanker. It is a 747. Drops 18,555 gallons. And we are using it in this siege in Northern California. We've been using it for the past few months. And again, very large aircraft, again, on our VLAT platform, just like a DC-10. And you have to remember that CAL FIRE has fostered this VLAT program and adopted it and worked with these contractors to develop it. And again, the 747, now we bring that into the fight. Another tool in the toolbox, specific use. Obviously not as agile as like our CAL FIRE S2s, but it is an important tool in the toolbox, and we continue to use it to fight these fires.
And if memory serves, there's some adjustment on those in terms of not only the width of the retardant drop, but the length as a result tuu, right?
That is correct, and that's a great point. We call that coverage level, and that's usually dictated by our air attacker or tactical air officer on what coverage level he or she will order on the ground. But a great point, yes, those tanks can be adjusted depending on length of the pattern and width of the pattern.
So the last thing I'll ask you, and I'll leave you be, is because I have seen more than once people who've gotten hit with that retardant, mostly in my profession, because they're in the mix of things where everybody else is sort of out of the way. How much, if any, of a concern is there if you get hit with that stuff?
Well, it rinse off as quick as possible, especially if it's on a vehicle. To get it off your vehicle as quick as possible. I think the biggest concern is, one, our firefighters, our ground troops are hit with retardant pretty often, and that's just part of being in the mix of the battle. I think that the biggest thing to know is it's very slippery, so make sure you have your footing below you before you move if you are hit with that, and then again, flush, rinse off immediately, and you'll be okay.
But not too toxic, if I remember right.
It is not, no.
Okay, very good. CAL FIRE Battalion Chief Mike Moeller from California's Southern Region paying us a visit and giving us a hand. We appreciate it, Chief.
Thank you so much.